This study was done by an undergraduate student, Mason Baldwin. This is Mason right here. And she developed this, and I was really impressed with what she did. And Dan was kind enough to let us come to the Great Plains Growers Conference to present this. Oh, by the way, my name is Tim Reinbach. Sorry about that. I'm with the University of Missouri and the Ag Experiment Station, and we got some funding from the Specialty Crop Block Grants, and we're able to do this with physalis or tomatillo and ground cherries, and we want to see is it commercially viable crop for us. And as you'll find out, it lives on the wild side. Mm-hmm. So I'll bring it over to Mason, and I'll chime in when unnecessary.
Hi guys, can you hear? Is this working?
It's supposed to be.
Is this on? I
Can y'all hear
you
her?
were just yelling.
Oh, just hold it close to your mouth.
Hello.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, hi guys. My name is Mason Baldwin. I am currently in my senior year here at, in Columbia at Mizzou. I'm a plant science major with an emphasis in horticulture, and over this past summer, I was working with Tim and the other individuals at South Farm and Jefferson Farm to grow ground cherries and tomatillos. So our summer started out, we had the high tunnel at South Farm and the fields over at Jefferson Farm. With Tim. We started these seeds in April, and then we ran everything until September and were collecting fruit until late September, and then maybe even October. And we had, this is a 2-year study, so this was also done in the summer of 2021. And we used those statistics and that information to select better cultivars for last summer. So some background, Physalis is the genus of flowering plants in the nightshade Solanaceae family with tomatoes and all of those things. Notable features include a large papery husk that encapsulates the fruit itself. It starts out green in the beginning, and then as the fruit matures, it turns papery and brown and kind of crunchy. Because of the relationship that they have with tomatoes, it makes these plants ideal candidates for research and growth in Missouri. We can actually anticipate to see something like the growth of the popularity growth in the last 20 years as tomatoes have. I think everybody grows tomatoes nowadays, and we see that being definitely in the future. They are native to Mexico and a staple in Mexican cuisine, which opens up a lot of new alleys for food. So here we have a map. That's where we are in central Missouri. The origin is Mexico, and then those are all the places that they've been exported. So as you can tell, we're probably a little bit more northern than everybody else who's growing them, but we'd like to give it a shot. Over the next 5 to 10 years, we can see an annual rise in demand for Mexican cuisine by 5.1% yearly, which is huge, and tomatillos are a big aspect of that kind of food, used in salsas, marinades, salsa verde, even some things like sweet dishes and things like that. So we're gonna go over what we were doing, how we did it, what results we got, and how that can help you guys.
But it's not gonna be super technical.
No.
So don't think we're gonna just kill you with data.
No, yeah, I definitely won't do that. So we were comparing yield over time in the tunnel versus the field. We had a 40 by 90 high tunnel.
40 by 50.
40 by 50.
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
And then we had 9 rows, I believe, in the field.
Yes.
And that we laid down with plastic and irrigation and all of that. Over the 2-year study, we had 10 different types, and then we broke it down into 6 for the second year because we decided that, first of all, seed availability. We wanted to make sure that everybody could get the seeds that we were actually looking at, and then whichever cultivars did best. We also did a potassium treatment, different ones for each location, and all of the different cultivars got every potassium treatment so we could see how that impacted growth and fruiting. And then we've done a lot of field days, outreach, things like that. So first, obviously, we started off in April. We prepped our soil, tilled the fields, laid down plastic, irrigation, made plot maps, and then it took us a while to get everything out in the field, but you know how that all goes. Pest control was a big deal because there were constantly little rabbits just pulling them out of the ground as soon as we had done that, and then I had to go back in and replace a bunch of them. And then that last picture there is the only plant we had that had some variegated leaves by the end of the summer, which I thought was really cool, some kind of virus or something. But there was a lot of maintenance. They are really wild growth pattern, so it's not exactly the same as a tomato. As I said before, 5 rows, 6 cultivars in the tunnel. In the field, we had the same cultivars, and then 9 rows, so we had more repetitions. Irrigation, staking, we actually did multiple methods. For the tomatillos, we did the Florida weave. And then on the ground cherries, there was actually no staking needed because the plants don't grow about more than 18 inches off the ground. Yeah, and then we did potassium treatments, just one application of that. Harvest was every 2 weeks as soon as we had enough fruit to kind of count that. We counted everything by plant and then used the information from the first year for the second year. You can see there in those photos there's also some other tomatoes because a big part of what we were doing is comparing their flavor profiles to beloved cherry tomato cultivars that everybody loves and see how they can hold up against that.
I might say that 2021 was much different than 2022. One of the issues that you had in 2022 was not only rabbits, but a lot of rainfall early.
I was up to my knees in mud, literally.
So thank goodness for plastic, but at the same time, it made it tough. And also, we'd spread compost that winter, and I think we probably lost some of our fertility because of that. And but you know, that threw another wrinkle into 2021. But that's why we did it 2 years, because you had different years. So here it is.
Yeah, here are just some pictures of the strains that we have, so you can kind of see these are all ripe fruits. None of them got as big as we had kind of anticipated. But yeah, you have the Milpa, Miltomata, and the Mexican strain are all pretty similar. And then the other varieties, the purple Coban, and Super Verde. Super Verde is the one that's typically used for tomato sauce and a lot of cuisine. These are the ground cherries. They're significantly smaller than the other tomatillos. They are completely encapsulated by the husk, and they actually have a longer shelf life as a result. The tomatillos, the bigger ones, can actually get pretty sticky once the husk has ripped open, but with these, they sat out on the desk for about a month, and they were still good by the end of it. So here are some of our results. This is from 2021, and you can see we did the tomatillo weight per fruit for each cultivar and then compared the high tunnel in the field and then the ground cherry. You can see that the purple Coban and the Super Verde did significantly better in the high tunnel. Super Verde has always done pretty well in the field, especially because the cultivar is supposed to have the largest fruit. And then the ground cherry, Aunt Molly is definitely the most productive. At least you'll see it reaches across years, but yeah, it was all pretty good.
There's a significant decrease in size in the high tunnel, wasn't there?
Significant. Yeah, the high tunnel, the tomatillos were a lot smaller, and then some of the ground cherries didn't even produce fruit. They would just produce the husk. So I would think that we're getting bunches and bunches of fruit. I'd go to grab it, and it's just break down into paper.
And Mason, what did we learn today from Dan's talk?
Oh, from Liz's talk?
Oh yeah, it was Liz's talk.
Yes.
I give him credit for nothing.
The high tunnel, we could not figure out why we were having so many issues. But then she said today during her talk that tomatoes in the high tunnel need 40% shade cover. And we didn't have any shade cover in there. So I'm sure they were suffering the entire time, and we had no idea.
Because I thought, here I am selling this, that with the husk that we were okay. Because the shoulders, on tomatoes, so okay, so we'll be all right.
And more southern place of origin,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
So we learned.
Yeah, and that's super prevalent in these graphs. You can see that the high tunnel just did not produce nearly as much as we thought it would. It was a little disappointing. But then Aunt Molly did pretty well again in 2022. And then the purple ended up being the most productive. Here we have our statistics on the potassium impact on weight in the field and the high tunnel. And you can see that the tomatillos did better when they had more potassium. Super Verde specifically was increasing in size with every application. And then the ground cherries did worse with more potassium, which we also found interesting. But they are a lot smaller, and it did not encourage fruiting. You can just tell. So outreach. We went to the Missouri State Fair. We had field days at South Farm. We had field days at Jefferson Farm. And at all of these, we did tastings, as you can see in those photos. We would collect a bunch of samples after I counted and weighed and put everything out, break them down, and then we would compare all of the ground cherries to all of the cherry tomatoes we had. I think we had 60 different varieties of cherry tomatoes.
I got a little carried away.
We had a lot of tomatoes. And then we had some larger tomatoes this past summer that we would compare to the tomatillos, but they were just not as productive. So moving on, these are some photos of the outreach we did in 2021, one of the field days we had where they were comparing all of the tastes of everything, and all of our rating sheets were out, and a bunch of people came by, and it was really cool to see people's reactions to trying these fruits that a lot of people, at least that I talked to, had never seen before. And this is us at the state fair. We had some prizes, we had a lot of tasting, and I heard from somebody that we were actually the most visited table in that whole building throughout the entire state fair, which I was really proud of. There's a lot of posters we made and had some prizes for kids, and it was really cool. So the cultivar conclusions we came to was that the tomatillo with the best growth in 2021 was the Super Verde. It had the highest weight per fruit, but the Milto Mate had more fruits overall. And then the ground cherry was Goldie. Again, in 2022, we had the Milto Mate with the highest weight and then purple with the highest number. This may have had to do also with some cross-pollination that happened in the field that we couldn't really do anything about because they were all kind of in the same area. And then the ground cherry was Aunt Molly. In the high tunnel, the tomatillo with best growth was the purple Coban, but we did not end up using that one in 2022 because there was not enough seed availability. I didn't feel like it would be accessible. And then Aunt Molly did the best ground cherry, and yeah. So overall, our recommendations for cultivar would be Aunt Molly and Milto Mate because they were the most prolific and the most reliable. The potassium, we would say the ground cherries preferred low to none, so don't use any there, but we also have...
No extra potassium, because remember, we put compost on it, so we had some already.
Right. Mm-hmm. We did add extra, I used an injector and applied potassium solution. And then in the field, they definitely did a lot better, but knowing what we do now about the shade, that could change. So some troubleshooting we did. We had lots of deer, rabbits, birds. Definitely heat, drought, and salt stress problems. I think the potassium application in the high tunnel too may have led us to have magnesium unavailable to the plants, which could have really heavily impacted fruiting. And we learned a lot about how Physalis grows. And then our final decision would be field had better growth than the high tunnel. There was definitely no fruit set or maturation on most of the plants, specifically the ground cherries and the high tunnel. Here are some photos. Those two on the top are in the high tunnel, and regardless of how much I staked them up with the Florida weave, it did not go very well. And then out in the field, they held up a lot better. They kind of stayed in their own lane and didn't try to grab onto things. However, knowing what we do now, Cornell University researchers Nathan Ream and Esperanza Shenstone have been using CRISPR and selecting plants in order to encourage more vertical growth and more tomato-like growth in the ground cherries. So that picture on the bottom left, the shorter one, is what all of our plants looked like out in the field, but now they're getting to the point where they can actually climb, which I think would encourage more fruiting. And with the ground cherries, whenever they're ripe, and you can tell by that brown color, you can just shake the whole plant and they all just fall off. So I would just shake my plants and then walk by and scoop them up by the handfuls and throw them in paper bags. There were just so many. So some of the main reason we really wanted to do all of this is because there's so many culinary uses, like salad, salsas, marinades, roasted. I didn't even know, but the ground cherries can actually be made into a cobbler or pie, and they are so sweet, they're delicious, and they're the perfect little snack. This was our Kaffner Farm to Fork event, where individuals doing research at the University of Missouri gave some of the culinary students some whatever they had been growing. So there were beef products, there were pork products, there were vegetables from everywhere. They cleaned me out of tomatoes, which I was very thankful for because we had so many. You want to say something?
Well, and remember, this was all student. This was all the students that grew all from the livestock to the vegetables, and they used them all. And you see the menu that in the upper corner. It was really neat. Used not only the tomatillos but also the ground cherries. Mm-hmm. It was very well received. And that's Mason getting the dean's talking to her, so she's pretty nervous.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, and this is some pictures of people's reactions and everything from the state fair. Some people loved the ground cherries and the tomatillos.
I think most people did.
Yes, the ground cherries were definitely more of the favorite, but the tomatillos, specifically the varieties we had and the way they may have cross-pollinated, they're more earthy and kind of funky and light and airy. Some people even compared them to like a potato type texture, but yeah, overall people really enjoyed it. And kids got a kick out of it. There's a quote from somebody at the state fair. I thought it was great, and because, I agreed. And then here's our taste rating comparisons. I just picked some of the kind of common cherry tomatoes and then compared them to everything. And you can see that the ground cherry really competes with, that first one should say tomato, but close enough. And then we wanted to let you guys know where you can get seeds. Baker Creek, Johnny Seeds, Totally Tomato, and you can even find some cultivars on Amazon. I just don't know how reliable those are going to be. So yeah, that's all.
Again, we want to thank the USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant for funding this, and again, you can see it on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, fire away. Mason will answer all of them.
Growing them commercially, what kind of yield can you expect? I mean, if I'm going to grow them, I'd like to know how much I need to plant to get enough product to sell.
You're not going to get the 25 pounds that they mentioned today that you get in a hoop house with tomatoes, or even in the field. They're probably a quarter of the yield, actually, of a hybrid tomato.
But the ground cherries competed just as well with the cherry tomatoes, which I was really surprised by.
Yes, in
They
yield.
were just as prolific, if not more so than some of the other cultivars, especially the smaller cherry tomatoes.
So interesting enough, I actually have a customer who wanted me to grow ground cherries, specifically the pineapple one. And when I tried to look for seed, I literally found 3 different species listed as pineapple ground cherries and 1 different genus. So the ones I got did not taste as pineapple as she remembered. Like she's tasted them somewhere and is looking to get like.
You remember?
That was just really weird that they can't agree on what the name, the species of ground cherry.
Right, that's interesting. I actually didn't order the seeds. Do you remember where you got them from?
I got Aunt Molly's from Baker Creek.
Specifically the pineapple.
I'm going through this in my mind. It's a process. This is a process. I thought I got pineapple from Baker Creek also. The Goldie I had to get special. Because, no, Baker Creek had New Hanover. Pineapple, yeah, you're right. You only get like one spot. And just like, you ever order seeds and they're not what you think they are? I think you're exactly correct that you got to be a little bit careful that, because you noticed, Mason, that they were crossbreeding.
Yes, definitely. There were a lot of, specifically the tomatillos, you could really tell because we had that purple one. So you could tell when they were cross-pollinating each other because there would be some that were green on part of them and then purple on the other part, because the purple ones are completely purple all the way around. So if they had any spots, then something weird happened out in the field. The ground cherries are a little harder to tell with that because they all look the same. They're all the same color pretty much. Maybe the Aunt Mollies are a little bit larger and the pineapple are a little bit smaller and more yellow on the inside, but you can't really tell that until you have them all opened up. I feel like...
Because they're really good.
Because we were talking about pineapple is strong.
Yes.
It was absolutely pineapple, yeah. And going into this summer, I actually hated tomatoes. I was the kid that I wouldn't eat tomatoes.
Would I have hired if I'd known that? She lied on her interview.
Yeah. Yeah. And then by the end of it, I was picking them off branches, constantly loving them. And, you know, we did that whole tasting, and now I love tomatoes. So I guess it was good for me.
Have you ever thought of a use for the husk? I've wondered about whenever you have a plant or something, what can we do with the part that everybody else throws away? And so I was just wondering if they, like could you grow mushrooms on them or something? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I wonder if they could be somehow cleaned in order to grow mushrooms or be inoculated with something. Usually I just kind of throw them out back in the field and let them deteriorate. The bugs kind of get them. They get wet and they like kind of fall away like paper the way that does. So they're not very hard or anything. I had not thought about uses for them.
They're probably high in nutrients. I'm just kind of going through my plant physiology. Those type of things, like soybean pods or corn shucks, are high in nutrients, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be also high in nutrients. So instead of losing those, we could make good use out of them. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Project part 2.
Yeah, break them down and grind them up.
Question for you or for anybody, if you know, my folks bought at the supermarket ground cherries, but they were labeled as Cape gooseberries, which is another name for them, right?
Yeah.
But they were the size of a large sun gold, rather than. And I think of I've grown Goldie and Aunt Molly, and they've been half to a third the size of a nice cherry tomato. And I was like, gosh, if they were bigger, I'd love to grow them, but I can't find anywhere for a large husk cherry or a Cape gooseberries variety in your searches, or if anybody's seen a variety that's much larger, I would love to know about it.
How'd those taste?
Amazing.
Okay.
Okay.
They were husked and in a pint and sold at the supermarket in Colorado.
But isn't that slide you showed of the genetic, don't they supposed to be bigger fruits too? Taller, bigger plants?
Yeah,
and,
they're working for bigger plants.
and fruits.
Yes.
Maybe they're on the market now.
Maybe?
On germinating, do you guys germinate in the greenhouse and then set out sets, and how long from, germination to maturity, how long from fruit set to ripe, all that kind of.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. They germinate slower than tomatoes. And they're not as hardy as a tomato when you germinate them. I mean, when they start coming up. So they get about 2 weeks behind in the greenhouse. But once you set them out, their peak production for us hit about the same time as cherry tomato peak production.
We started the cherry tomatoes much later than we did the.
Yes.
Yeah, we started them in the greenhouse, the cherry tomatoes, much later than we did the tomatillos, and they had eventually caught up. But by the time they were producing, all of them were producing at around the same level, at least in concern to the cherry tomatoes and the ground cherries. The tomatillos took, a lot longer, but.
Yeah, the cherry tomato, the husk cherries are the first.
I grow tomatillos and husk cherries in my garden, and because especially the husk cherries, fall off the plants, there's always volunteer weeds the next year, And I found that by the time I've found the same thing about the bigger, like they're just not that vigorous when you first seed them. So when I plant them out, the volunteers out in the garden are twice the size of the ones that I'm transplanting out. So I'm wondering if I should just be direct seeding instead of transplanting them.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
There's another question that we
Yes.
probably want answered here in Missouri. Yeah.
And the rabbits will eat them.
Oh my gosh, the rabbits! I replaced probably, I don't know, 40 plants out of, in every single day for a week because they were just ripping them out of the ground.
Corn earworms seem to be the biggest insect pest. Once the fruits in tomatillos, once the fruits get ripe, they just go inside and start chomping them down. Did you see those?
Yeah, a little bit. They toward the
Oh, at the end?
toward the end specifically, but our tomatoes didn't even really do very well in the field, so we didn't have a lot of pests in the area. But yeah, they were definitely a little wormy, but I would say, I don't know, 1 out of every 5 dozen.
Wasn't too bad. And diseases didn't seem to be bad either.
Nope, we
Foliar
had that
diseases.
one variegated plant that got some kind of virus. It was just cool looking, but there were no diseases. The tomato hornworms even left them alone.
Yeah.
We didn't have any of those on there.
I sprayed our tomatoes for leaf blights. You know, it's escaping me. The ones that's black, it starts from the bottom, goes up. You know, I sprayed them for those twice, the tomatoes twice, but never had to touch the end of the tomatillos.
And they were in rows
Never.
right next to each other.
Yes.
And I was running around, touching them all over the place, going back and weaving, and no, they never had any issues with that.
I grew the ground cherries when I was in Massachusetts. We got them from the master gardeners, and just one plant, and we planted it, and it had, I do not know which variety it is, but it is very tiny and almost orange, and it extremely sweet. I mean, so sweet that when you touch it with your fingers, the fingers become sticky. And then after that, I mean, it was good, we liked it, but then we really had difficulty getting rid of it after that. It kept coming back, even though, Massachusetts has, the cold in Massachusetts is really very hard, and, the frost, but it seems that probably the seeds, they live through that, and then it keeps coming, and we just never got rid of it. So it keeps, so for people that want to grow it in a farm, you really need to isolate it so that if you are growing other stuff, you need to isolate it so that you do not have this problem that I had.
Oh yeah, I bet our fields in our high tunnel are going to be covered in volunteers, especially if they came back in Massachusetts after winter. Then
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.
yeah, thank you guys.